In the wake of a terrible terrorist attack that left 28 people dead on April 22nd, tensions have rapidly risen between two nations with a deep history of conflict and hostility, India and Pakistan. India has since taken decisive action, launching missile strikes on Pakistan territory, killing at least 26 people and injuring dozens more, which Pakistan has deemed an act of war. A ceasefire has since been established, leaving both sides in a sensitive standstill state. But the risk of all-out war remains very possible. And given that both India and Pakistan are nuclear powers, the risk of catastrophic nuclear war is a possibility that has implications for the entire world. Tensions between these two nations have bubbled beneath the surface for decades, rising and falling over time and dating back to the original partition of British India in 1947, when the two independent states of India and Pakistan first formed. That very year, war broke out between the two, with the First Indo-Pakistani War breaking out in late 1947 and running throughout 1948, with both sides fighting over the disputed Kashmir region. The Second Indo-Pakistani War followed a couple of decades later, again over Kashmir, with the US and Soviet Union having to intervene and orchestrate a ceasefire. More wars, attacks, and military standoffs followed in the ensuing decades, involving terrorist attacks, airstrikes, and suicide bombings. But the most recent in a long series of events, the attack of April 22nd, was one of the most dramatic and could very well send India and Pakistan spiraling into a much higher level of conflict than ever before. The attack occurred in the Biseran Valley, a popular and scenic touristic destination in the Jammu and Kashmir region, which is officially under the administrative control of India. 5 attackers armed with AK-47s and M4 carbine rifles approached a group of tourists. According to reports, the attackers asked for the names and religions of each person, with some allegedly asked to recite an Islamic verse. Those who were unable to do so or did not provide satisfying answers to the terrorists were shot. It was the worst massacre of civilians in India since the Mumbai bombings of 2008. The majority of the 28 casualties were Hindus and tourists. A local pony operator was also killed after intervening and trying to wrestle a gun from one of the attackers to save lives. One female member of the group was allegedly spared and instructed to narrate the horrors of what had happened to India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. Investigations were immediately launched into who orchestrated and carried out the attack, with officials on both Indian and Pakistani sides blaming one another. Originally an Islamic terrorist group named the Resistance Front, part of the larger Pakistani militant group Lashkar-e-Taiba, claimed responsibility, stating that the attack was carried out in response to Indian government policy allowing non-Kashmiri people to live and work in the region. The group released a statement denouncing the arrival of outsiders and demographic changes in the region, stating, "These non-locals arrive posing as tourists, obtain domiciles, and then begin to act as if they own the land. Consequently, violence will be directed toward those attempting to settle illegally." The Resistance Front has a history of this sort of act, having killed several civilians in previous attacks. However, shortly after claiming responsibility, the group retracted its original claim, instead accusing Indian intelligence agents of orchestrating the attack. This led to much confusion and differing views on who was responsible for the attack. Investigations carried out by India's National Investigation Agency have since identified 3 terrorists, Ali Bai, Hashim Musa, and Adil Hussein Tokka. At least 2 of them are Pakistani nationals, and all 3 are said to be part of the Lashkar-e-Taiba group. Indian officials have also alleged some form of cross-border involvement from Pakistan, with some even blaming the Pakistani armed forces, which have had links with militant groups in Kashmir in the past. Pakistani Defense Minister Khwaja Asif dismissed these allegations, stating, "This is all homegrown. There are revolutions in different so-called states against India, not 1, not 2, but dozens. From Nagaland to Kashmir, in the south, in Chhattisgarh, in Manipur. In all these places there are revolutions against the Indian government." Asif also would not rule out the idea that India had orchestrated the attacks, or even that they were some sort of false flag operation designed to rally the public against Pakistan. In short, both countries blame one another for what happened, and the perpetrators remain at large. In the meantime, India began its responses by initiating a series of diplomatic and economic retaliatory measures against Pakistan. It has expelled Pakistani diplomats and immediately revoked all visas for Pakistani nationals. It's also shut down the main border crossing between the two countries. Pakistan has responded in kind, also revoking visas for Indian citizens, ejecting diplomats, suspending bilateral trade between the two countries, and closing its airspace to all Indian airlines. But India has taken things a step further. It's made the big decision to suspend a water-sharing agreement between the two countries called the Indus Water Treaty. The Indus Water Treaty was arranged and negotiated by the World Bank and signed in 1960 by the Prime Ministers of India and Pakistan. It sets out detailed regulations regarding the use of water of the Indus River and its various tributaries which flow along and across the border between the two countries. It's long been heralded as one of the most successful water-sharing agreements on the planet. Even during times of turmoil, strife, and conflict between India and Pakistan, the treaty has remained in place. Respected by both sides because of its importance for agriculture, power generation, navigation, fishing, and more. But not anymore. India's decision to back out of the treaty has been received with anger and frustration on the streets of Pakistan because the country relies heavily on the water of the Indus River. Some estimates even say that up to 90% of Pakistani agriculture relies on water from India. If that were cut off, it could cripple the nation's economy and health. Mohammed Haris Dar of the Markazi Muslim League in Pakistan stated, "Rivers around the world can pass through as many as 10 countries, and all those countries have rights over them. India has built illegal dams before, and now it's announced an end to the Indus Water Treaty. We believe this is an open declaration of war." The Pakistan government agrees, saying that any attempt by India to stop or divert water from the river will be seen as an act of war. For now, it remains to be seen what exact actions, if any, India will take over the rivers. But in the meantime, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a significant speech, just a day after announcing the aforementioned slew of measures against Pakistan. Modi began his speech in Hindi, but in a rare move, he switched to English partway through to state, "Today, from the soil of Bihar, I say to the whole world, India will identify, track, and punish every terrorist and their backers. We will pursue them to the ends of the earth. India's spirit will never be broken by terrorism. Terrorism will not go unpunished. Every effort will be made to ensure that justice is done. The entire nation is firm in this resolve. Everyone who believes in humanity is with us. I thank the people of various countries and their leaders who have stood with us in this time." Indian reporters and others around the world say that Modi's choice of language is particularly symbolic. For some, it represents his desire to prove not just to the Indian people, but to the whole world, how seriously India is taking these events, and how serious it is in its resolve to fight back against terrorism and terroristic groups, which it often associates with Pakistan. Some have even suggested that Modi's switch to English could be part of a push to gain support from key allies around the world like the US, which would be immensely important if the country pursues further military action against its neighbor. And there is precedent for India striking Pakistan in retaliation for prior attacks. After an attack on an Indian military base in 2016, Modi sent ground forces into Pakistan-controlled Kashmir to strike military targets. In 2019, after a suicide bombing in Kashmir left 40 Indian policemen dead, the Indian PM ordered airstrikes on alleged militant sites within Pakistan. He's not a man who shies away from striking back, and given the dramatic and tragic nature of this particular attack, it would have been foolish to expect anything less than at least some sort of military maneuver from India. That maneuver came on the 6th of May, when India launched what it's calling Operation Syindor. It launched missiles against 9 targets in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, with the government statement claiming that the missiles were focused on locations where terrorist attacks against India had been planned and orchestrated. Our actions have been focused, measured, and non-escalatory in nature. No Pakistani military facilities have been targeted. India has demonstrated considerable restraint in selection of targets and method of execution. The Indian Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri, elaborated further, suggesting that more attacks were being planned by Pakistani terrorists, forcing India to take drastic action. Intelligence and monitoring of Pakistan-based terror modules showed that further attacks against India were impending. Therefore, it was necessary to take preemptive and precautionary strikes. However, Pakistan has presented a very different version of events, stating that none of the sites struck were militant camps, and that those injured and killed were innocent civilians, with tallies of 26 deaths and 46 injuries so far. Pakistan has also not simply sat by and let these strikes occur unpunished. It launched retaliatory firing across the Kashmir border overnight on May 6th and into May 7th, with Indian forces reporting at least 7 civilian deaths and 30 more injuries. Multiple world leaders have responded to the events, with US President Donald Trump calling the attacks a shame and saying, "I just hope it ends very quickly," with the president later going on to claim that he had played a large part in negotiating a ceasefire between the two sides. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres stated that he was very concerned about the Indian military operations across the line of control and international border. He calls for maximum military restraint from both countries. The world cannot afford a military confrontation between India and Pakistan. Sadly, many people predicted these events, as there was a great deal of pressure on Modi from the Indian public. People across the country were enraged about the Pahalgam attack, particularly Hindus who represent around 1.1 billion of India's 1.4 billion strong population. In such a situation, the king must protect the people, stated Mohan Bhagwat, head of the Hindu nationalist group RSS. At high levels too, members of Modi's military and security establishment are said to have urged a swift and strong military response. The big issue that India now faces is that Pakistan could respond with even bigger attacks, and as a nuclear power, it has more than enough firepower to counteract almost anything India might throw its way. Plus, Pakistan appears ready, willing, and able to take whatever measures it deems necessary, and has taken multiple measures of its own throughout the crisis so far. Indeed, as well as ejecting diplomats and revoking visas, Pakistan has most notably suspended the Simla Agreement, which exists to provide peaceful conflict resolution between Pakistan and India. The agreement was signed by representatives from both countries in 1972 after the Indo-Pakistan War of 1971. It was designed to enable the countries to end the conflict and confrontation that had dominated their international relations for many years, and stipulated that both sides should agree to settle their differences by peaceful means through bilateral negotiations. In suspending the agreement, Pakistan sent a clear message. Peaceful negotiation is off the table, and military action is very much an option. The country's defense minister Khawija Asif previously said that Pakistan had been working on the assumption that India would launch an attack of some kind, so it was partially prepared for the recent strikes. Asif said that Pakistan's defenses forces are armed and ready, and the military has spoken with the government about their plans to respond to Indian aggression. We have reinforced our forces because it's imminent now, so in that situation, some strategic decisions have to be taken, so those decisions have been taken. Should all-out war break out, it would not only represent a point of no return for both nations, but could cause widespread chaos and destruction on both sides of the border, as the two are more evenly matched than they may first appear. In the Global Firepower 2025 military rankings, India comes in as the fourth strongest military force on the planet, while Pakistan sits in 12th. India has an active duty force of over 1.4 million people, with over 1.1 million more in reserve. Meanwhile, Pakistan has just over 650,000 active duty personnel and another 550,000 reservists. India also has many more aircraft than Pakistan, with over 2,200 for India and approximately 1,400 for Pakistan, and nearly 10 times more armored vehicles, with close to 150,000, dwarfing Pakistan's tally of less than 18,000. On the face of it, those numbers make more worrying reading for Pakistan. However, India has dedicated a large chunk of its military manpower to guarding its border with China, a country with which it does not have the strongest of relations. Pakistan, on the other hand, is much closer with China diplomatically and doesn't need to worry so much about monitoring or fearing that nation. As Harsh Pant, vice president of the Observer Research Foundation think tank in New Delhi, puts it, India's military is larger, but it has the strategic challenges of two borders to defend. So in a war situation, despite having a smaller force and fewer resources, Pakistan will be far from a pushover for the Indian military. The two nations could go toe-to-toe in a prolonged and deadly conflict with untold devastation on both sides. And with the backing of China on the Pakistan side and the US on the Indian side, it's a war that could continue for a long, long time and have far-reaching implications on a global geopolitical scale. We can see this in the kinds of military agreements and investments each country has established in recent years. India has bought more and more arms from Western manufacturers in countries like the US and France, for example, actually becoming the second biggest importer of arms in the world after Ukraine, and seeking to modernize its military equipment as much as possible. It's also historically purchased many weapons from Russia, though it's reduced its investment there in recent times. Pakistan, meanwhile, buys the bulk of its military equipment from China. Indeed, Chinese imports accounted for more than 80% of Pakistan's total arms stock between 2019 and 23. Should a war break out and devolve into a stalemate, or should one side feel overtly threatened, the risk of nuclear action cannot be ruled out, or even the creation of a new kind of Cold War with India and Pakistan effectively acting like proxies for the US and China, respectively. And when we compare the two countries' nuclear arsenals, they're much closer in number than they are in soldiers or armored vehicles. Both countries are believed to possess almost identical amounts of nuclear warheads, with around 170 on either side, and both are working hard on ways to deploy those warheads deep into enemy territory, should the need ever arise, like long-range missiles. As far as their existing equipment goes, India has the edge. Its land-based but mobile Agni-V missile can reach ranges from 3,000 to almost 5,000 miles. Meanwhile, the Pakistani equivalent, the Shaheen-3 missile, is still in development but has an estimated potential range of around 1,700 miles. It's not as far as India's, but it's still far enough for Pakistan to strike almost anywhere in India if it chooses to do so. Pakistan has also developed its own tactical nuclear weapon, named the NASA ballistic missile. It has a range of just over 40 miles. That's not enough to hit targets deep within Indian territory, but it's still more than enough for any tactical strikes in the Kashmir region or other border zones. India also has weapons capable of delivering nuclear payloads, like its Prahar and Priti, but it has a strict no-first-use policy surrounding its nuclear arsenal. In other words, it vows to only resort to the use of nuclear weapons if another country uses them against it first, or if another country uses biological or chemical weapons. Pakistan, however, has no such policy. It could, if it felt sufficiently threatened or decided that the end justified the means, take the first step to launch a nuclear attack against its neighbor. And the effects of nuclear war between these nations will be on a level the world has never seen before. Researchers actually conducted a study published in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists in 2019 to imagine how destructive and devastating it would be, concluding that tens of millions of lives would be wiped out, entire cities would disappear from the map, and the effects would be felt for generations to come. The direct effects of this nuclear exchange will be horrible. The authors estimate that 50 to 125 million people would die, depending on whether the weapons used had yields of 15, 50, or 100 kilotons. The ramifications for Indian and Pakistani society will be major and long-lasting, with many major cities largely destroyed and uninhabitable. Smoke and radioactive particles would spread globally within weeks, cooling the global surface, reducing precipitation, and threatening mass starvation. Thankfully, we're not at that stage yet. However, the risks cannot be ignored. Even though a ceasefire has since been established and talk of peace is allegedly on the table, both countries remain in a precarious position. All it takes is one more attack, one slip from either side, one spark that could light the fire of conflict all over again, and cross-border attacks could resume. For now, we watch and wait, in the hope that India and Pakistan can put their differences aside and continue the movement of de-escalation. What do you think? Can you see the situation in India and Pakistan escalating to a point of no return, or even nuclear war? Share your thoughts in the comments. Now go and check out India versus Pakistan, the war that no one survives, or click this other video instead.